test that to make sure it's working.
Shall we come up here and talk? Because that's not working.
Only if she needs to.
Yes. I'll just whisper into.
Very happy to see you. Yes, very happy to be here.
Oh, it's got no battery, Matt. That's why.
Well, this one's.
Flashing on the battery thing.
Yeah, that's part of the issue,
When
but
you're
it's not the main
finished-
issue because this one's the same.
Sorry.
In the middle of Zoom.
I'm
Let's plug it in.
are we recording? We're on. We'll get started in about 30 odd seconds. Is it just Councillor Cornish out there? Yeah, he's coming now. Cool, cool. Very good. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Councillors, and welcome to our budget workshop this evening. We have two apologies this evening from Councillor Lemon and Councillor Turnbull. And I've had a number of councillors contact me who may be watching online and take the opportunity to ask questions afterwards. So, without... Councillor Pickett, welcome. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Karishma to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. And as per previous years, we are going to go through Budget Workshop 2 tonight. The purpose of tonight's workshop is multifold, really. So the first thing we're going to look at is the council budget. So we'll revisit some of the slides that we looked at last time. There were a few questions, so we'll try to address those tonight. We'll then look at council's cost of business, multiple rating scenarios. We'll discuss the long-term plan assumptions and outcomes. We'll discuss debt, and then a quick summary of the projects as well. As always, feel free to ask questions as we go, or you can save them till the end. I'm happy with either format. Where are we at? So we're doing our workshops, the second workshop tonight. The next steps are that draft budget and long-term plan will be presented to the audit committee on the 30th of March and then to council on the 12th of April. And then it proceeds to community consultation. So a few of these slides that I'd like to talk through. Now, there were some questions that came up in the last workshop, so I'll try and address it as we go along. So there were no questions on this, but just for completeness, that's council's revenue, and just showing that rates does make up the biggest chunk of our revenue at 79%. Council's expenses, so again, I made the pie chart quite small there because I wanted to talk through the questions that came up last time around the South Australian Productivity Commission findings and how we compared against those. So if you look at the table there, we've got Burnside, we've got SAPC, and then we've got Norman Waterhouse, the numbers that they had provided us. The one thing I do want to point out is that since the SAPC findings and Norman Waterhouse presentation, the accounting standards have changed. And what it requires us to do is to cost up our volunteers. So what we're basically saying is if we didn't have them, then how much would we have to pay for the services? So what would the expense be? And for Burnside, with in excess of 400 volunteers, that comes up to 900,000. From an accounting perspective, there is an income offset as well. So it's just basically showing us that there's an income and expense component. So in the accounts, there's a net impact. But it's important to note that the materials that are shown here of 22 million are in fact 21 million. There's no actual spend on volunteers. So I've taken that out and showed that in a separate line just to compare apples with the SAPC findings. So as you can see, we are slightly under in employee costs and slightly over in materials. So stand at 34 and 42%, and SAPC is 35 and 41%. Are there any questions on that slide? If not, I'll go through the breakdown of some of the expenses. That's right. So it's based on an hourly rate of what it would cost us to go out into the market. So what the executive team did was reviewed all our volunteer services that we provide. You can look at them and say, you know, if we were to provide them, which ones would we and wouldn't we provide? And for the city of Burnside, we determined that we would provide all of these services. So we've costed all of them up if we went to market. So the other thing, oh, sorry.
I do recall last year or the year before that our materials cost as a percentage was a lot higher. So we're now looking at those Productivity Commission figures and Norman Waterhouse, we're getting closer to what the norm is. Is that a fair statement?
I think in the previous years, we didn't split out the volunteers. So to be fair, we had that at 44% previously.
Okay.
And that might be what you're referring to. But if you do split it out, then we certainly are closer to the SAPC findings and Norman Waterhouse.
Thank you.
The other side of it as well is the operating surplus. Now, in the past, and I recall in last year's budget discussion, we did speak about how we do really well against our operating surplus that we've set at the adopted budget. So I just wanted to play this one through. So the adopted budget that we adopted for this current year was 230,000 surplus. And per Q2, so the quarter two review that came to council last week, the surplus was 1.3 million. And that was in line with the discussions we had, that we start off really low, but we always end up doing a lot better than we adopted. So I do want to show you that the increase in surplus is only because of these grants we are getting, the capital grants. And again, another accounting issue is these are all used for capital projects, but they're included in the operating statement, which means they affect the operating surplus. So if you actually take out the grant from these numbers, we are actually operating at a deficit currently. So if we didn't have those grants this year, then the Q2 review statements would show a deficit of $53,000. So that's just to say that we've adopted a number, but we have had cost pressures through the year as well, or through half the year. So that's quite an interesting exercise to show, and I think moving forward, we'll try to do this as well, just take off the one-off events, just to show the normal surplus that we would be achieving. Now, there was some other discussion around the top 10 expenses for council. There was questions around consultants, questions around contractual services and contractors. So the consultants is actually included in the professional services of 793. And the question that came up last workshop was whether we are using consultants rather than our own employees. And just one example that I wanted to run through with you is included in that professional services for consultants is internal audit. And we spend about $80,000 on our internal auditors. And we did have internal audit as a function in previous years, so we did have a member of staff conducting that function, but it was a lot higher than the $80,000. In addition, it's also best practice to outsource it because of that level of independence. Other things that are included in the consultants are tree management surveys, we've got engineering assessments. So all of those consultant fees are things that we can't do in-house. Wherever we can, we do actually use our staff to perform the work. The other thing that we spoke about was other contractual services. So you'll see that's $2.2 million in there. And I have included a breakdown. I should mention the only reason I haven't included a breakdown on consultants is because we're going to tender for internal audit. And I didn't want to have that in the public domain. So the other contractual services, $2.2 million, really made up of two main items. One is cloud services, software licenses and support. So a lot of the IT expenses of nearly $900,000. but most of them are things we can't get out of. So they're Microsoft, Tech1, Adobe, we've got Nintex workflows, etc. So things that we just don't really have flexibility in getting out of. The other big one in there for $1.3 million are the temporary wages. So the swimming pool, depot, library, and a few other locations use a lot of casual staff. And the reason we use the casual staff is because we use either seasonal or cyclical or ad hoc, and especially in recent times, a lot of the library staff have been in isolation, and we've had to call upon the casual staff. So we do use casual staff where we need staff to fill those demands. And we have found that using casual staff is 40 to 60% cheaper than having staff on our books. Not only the rates, because we have EA rates versus the federal rates, which are lower, but also other things like maternity leave, leave entitlements, all of those things that come with being on the books. So we do find that it is definitely cheaper getting the casual staff where and when required. The third one that we spoke about last time was contractors of 5.6. I've just listed the top 10 spends and tried to provide a little bit of a description of what these are. Again, as we spoke, the last line there, the biggest expense in there is the volunteers, which is not really an expense. But the other ones in there, so rates administration, it's the general valuation fees, so that's $225,000 out of the $250,000. The other ones are Hills Face fuel reduction. The next two, domestic assistance and social support group, these have offsetting incomes against them. And then we've got street lighting, property admin, we've got EHI in there, cleaning, which has gone up in recent years because of COVID, and the Hills Face management, land management. So that's just giving you a snapshot of the expenses.
So we had like Dash Architects who did the work on the Tasmore wading pool, who regarded it as a consultant, is that right? No?
No, thank you, Mike. Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong. They would be capitalized.
Capitalised, okay.
So whenever we're doing a project and we do the initial design phase, and then we build or construct to the design, then we are able to capitalize all of the design costs for the consultant. Yes, Councillor Pickett?
The street lighting, is that the power for, it says power for street lighting, electricity street lighting?
Is it?
Is that what it means?
It's maintenance and power. So, sorry. Thanks, Grant. That's a great question. It's maintenance and power. So the tariff we pay to SA Power Networks, they also maintain street lights on our behalf, which is why it's classed as a contractor expense.
Right, so it doesn't include any electricity,
No, it's rental and maintenance effectively.
Yes, Jane?
In terms of contracts, does that include all our big items like footpaths and
No.
road asphalting and all of that sort of thing?
No, that would be considered capital. So that would all come as a capital expense, so wouldn't be captured under the contractor bucket as such. No other questions? Yes.
Oh, thank you. Hang on, here we go. Now, facilities maintenance management, facilities management functions, I can see they're kind of all over, covered in every one of these areas, I suppose. Like, we do facilities management functions under contractors, under other contractual services maybe.
Part of it would be under property administration. So
Property, oh, okay.
administration would be in there. So things like building maintenance, security, air conditioning, all of those things would come under property
Right,
admin.
okay.
And cleaning's the other one, that's right.
And
Thanks,
cleaning.
Michelle.
Okay, so I think I sent this on to the administration at one stage. There's been a review of, in local councils in South Australia, facilities management functions, and it's been recommended that our audit committees and risk teams conduct random audits of facilities management functions. This came about from a report, Facilities Maintenance in Local Government. It was published in August last year. I think you might have been familiar with that. So my question is our audit committee actioning that conclusion of that report in that way? I think I sent an email about this, and I don't recall what the answer was, but it's a suggestion, because it's a fairly significant report that came from ICAC in South Australia, and it's all related to contractors and so forth. I mean, it's a 12-page report. It was just on my mind, you know, something, because we do a bit of, you know, outsourcing here and there. I just wondered whether that would be a bit of due diligence to do. Could we bring that to the attention of the audit committee?
Thank you,
Please.
Councillor Henschke. We can certainly revisit it when we're looking at our internal audit plan. That's up for
Yeah.
review.
Yeah.
So we can flag it for the internal audit, just to have a look at that.
Yeah, because it was highly recommended that councils do that, the commissioners forward. I'm referring to the expenses we have in facilities maintenance, property management. We outsource a lot of that to contractors. Well, that would be on page 9, for example, under property administration, cleaning, all those contracts. And the Commissioner, Anne Vanstone, has written that in the public interest, they've made observations in this area across South Australia, and they recommend that all councils do this in their auditing, audit themselves. So I just think it's an important report. I can send it on to you all.
That would be great, Councillor Henschke.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You're
we can have a
welcome.
look at it.
And just one more question briefly.
Sure.
We employ consultants when we use temporary labour, casual staff in areas where the demand is not constant. We have a lot of trees requiring assessment in the council assessment panel, a development assessment panel, planning approvals, as you know, trees pop up every now and then, significant trees requiring approval for removal of them. And so that every time that comes up, we have to do a report. So I'm wondering whether there's consistent amount of tree consultants reports, which would mean we can just do that in-house. Sorry, I'm not very clear.
You know, Martin might be able to add some more, but what we essentially do now is we have where our staff resource is exhausted, we have to go to use external consultants to do the reports. The only way for us to not have an allocation for external reports would be to put additional staff on. Now, because that's a very variable part of the business, it's a prudent way to manage it. So I wouldn't recommend us ever not having that facility in place.
Oh.
In terms of professional services and legal expenses, is there a reason that we separate those? Or, because our legal expenses not professional?
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Yes, the best practice is to split out legal expenses for transparency and comparison between councils. Also, I believe when we were looking at the SAPC reports, there was a recommendation to split out legal costs, just so we can compare apples for apples with everyone. And then we include all the other consultants in the consultants bucket of professional services. So that's just the split of our top 10 contractors. Moving along, the key challenges for 22-23. There's lots of challenges, but the key ones in particular are the revenue that we've lost in the couple of years preceding because of the 0% rates, and I will go through that in a slide further down. There are some large increases in CPI and LGPI. Again, I'll go through that in one of the slides coming up. There are cost pressures for us, especially this year with the elections. And then we've got the performance of Water and other subsidiaries, which again puts downward pressure on the surplus. The rest of the challenges are things we face pretty much every year, just balancing our rates against expectations of ratepayers, against the services we provide, the quality of the services we provide. Legislative changes are sustainability long-term, maintaining assets to set standards and not having that asset backlog we spoke about, and of course, maintaining that focus on efficiency and effectiveness. So just a quick recap on our rates increases. As we mentioned in the last workshop, we have kept rates low and lower than LGPI and cost of business for the past 4 years. The past 2 years, we've kept it at 0%. And we did have a discussion with the audit committee around this, and the audit committee have provided advice that it's not sustainable in the long term, and then we just need to look at the long-term view whenever we're making rates decisions, which we do. So this is just the impact from the 0% rates rise in the past 2 years. And like we mentioned before as well, whenever we set the rates, there is an impact on the longer-term financial plan and the sustainability of council. So the first year that we did rates is 0, the LGPI was 1.6%. So this is just on the assumption that rates would have mirrored LGPI. So we would have lost about 660,000. 21-22, that would have increased to 824 because we're losing the rates base every year. And then this year, it's a cumulative effect again of 823. Provided that we do set rates at higher than 0% this year. So the cumulative revenue that we've lost is 2.3%. So if council were to choose to catch up for the 2 years, then we'd be looking at 5.5% to start with, and then add on whatever we wanted for this year. So that's clearly too high. That's not happening. Councillor Harvey?
Did you cut costs though?
We did, yes, we did. We did cut costs, but we did lose the rates revenue as well, so the base has reduced.
If your revenue is down 2.3 million and your costs are down 2.3 million, you're no worse off.
Now, as we saw before, the costs have cut, but that's why we're in a deficit of 53 currently. So if we didn't have that, for example, for this current year, so if we set our rates at, say, 2% or 3%, we would have had a surplus. So that's what we're saying, that there is an impact from the rates being at 0% from these couple of years. So we have lost the rates revenue. So for example, if we had 2% in the previous 2 years, then this year we would have had 823,000 more, $2.3 million more in revenue.
Can I ask, so, but what about all the development going on and the value of general, by the time we deal with all of that, we should be better off?
Thank you, Councillor Henschke. No, we're not, unfortunately, because, for example, the valuations have gone up by 30%, but it will be distributed across the city. So for us as a council, it doesn't really make a difference. It's just the distribution that affects individual ratepayers. So it would be nice if our rates revenue went up with the valuations, but for us, it doesn't make a difference. So what we see as a council is, for example, we'll have, say, $40 million last year in rates. Council decides, for argument's sake, if you say, let's keep it at 0%, so we're just raising 40 million, and then we work out how to get the 40 million from the ratepayers based on their valuation. So all it does, it just redistributes who pays what. So it's just, the pie is just cut in different ways.
Thank you. What about all the land divisions going on, the blocks, the 2 for 1, the 3 to 1?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. That's accounted for as growth. So one of the assumptions we've got in the budget this year is 0.5% from growth. So all the subdivisions. So the second plot of land, which is cut from the first, is considered growth. So that's included in revenue. That's additional to the normal rates. Yeah, sure.
Councillors, if I could just go back to the point that Councillor Jones made around, well, you've made the savings. That's absolutely right. So if you look back at Q2 and strip out the revenue that we've received from those grants, we're at a small deficit, you can say break even. If we had applied rate increases over the last 2 years that were in line with the LGPI increase, we'd have 800,000 surplus on our bottom line, okay? So that middle line there on that table there shows that we would have a surplus at the moment for 823. Now, we haven't got that at the moment. What we're arguing is we have stripped out that unnecessary budget and we are operating a lean machine now. It's an important thing to have in the back of our mind when you look at the percentage increase that's required this year, the next year I mean, particularly when you compare what that rate increase will be compared to other councils. We took low or zero rate increases the last 2 years. Some of our other councils who we're going to be compared with didn't do that. Okay, so I think the only point we want to make there is that. So when you come to look at what we're proposing this year, that's an important consideration. Thank you.
Just on that, can I sort of understand where this table's going. 2021, I think everybody, all councils went zero, didn't they? Because that was at the height of COVID.
No.
No? Okay.
No, they didn't. It was the year before, I think, Grant?
No, fair enough. So 2022, 23 is the one we're talking about,
That's correct.
isn't it? So we
next
haven't
year.
lost that yet.
No. No,
Have
we
we?
have in terms of,
It's a bit presumptive, perhaps.
no,
If we're going zero again, that's what we'll lose. Is that
No,
what
no,
the
no.
table said?
no, we have.
It's compound. It's compounded.
Except that's next year.
No, so what we're trying to show there is that we have lost that 823 as the base.
Understand?
So
This year?
but we've lost that base for next year as well, because when you're adding the, say, 2% on top of 40 million,
Oh, okay.
it would have been 40.8.
Understand.
So that's just saying we have, I mean, with the rates decisions, whatever it might be, we do lose a certain percentage in perpetuity forever into the future, because, you know, if you're doing 3% or not 4%, et cetera, you do lose that. It's compounding impact, correct.
But we still have maintained surpluses, except for maybe this year, which is if you take the grants out,
Yep,
That's correct.
in which
yes.
case it's break even,
Yes.
53,000.
that's correct, yes. And that's to Martin's point as well. When we did set the budget, the surplus was only 200,000, and we did achieve that because of the savings that were in there. If it wasn't 0%, it would have been $1 million. So that's what we're saying. When we're looking at next year, again, it has that impact into the future. So when we're looking at next year, we just need to keep that in mind, that's all. So the budget assumptions for 22-23, so there's no change in differential rates. Vacant land is 200%. All other rate in the dollars are the same, so no differential rating for commercial properties. There's a 0% growth included, so Lillian, to your point, that's where the subdivisions come in. We've done a detailed, or we're still in the process of actually doing a detailed bottom-up approach on all our material costs and looking at, you know, where we can take out any costs, or where we got cost pressures, where we can take out any reductions, savings, errors, where, you know, we've budgeted more or less, et cetera. So we go through that with a fine-tooth comb, and the executive are doing that as well. We've taken out that 430 this year from employee costs, the budgeted vacancy, so we're not fully funding from this year onwards, so we're carrying that through because they're recurrent savings. The operating projects are currently assumed at 400, but we'll come to council with a report on the 22nd of March, and that can be determined. We're maintaining all 118 services, and we've currently budgeted for 164.82 FTE, which is what it is currently. But we are coming to council with another report to increase the cap. Now, for the past 5 years, we haven't had any increases in cap, or potentially even longer. So we have identified with the increases in services and service levels that we do need to increase our cap slightly, and we will be coming to council for approval for that. However, very conscious as well of the cost pressure that it adds onto council in a year where we've already got number of high costs. So we are thinking about the idea of recruiting only for half the year. So we go out for recruitment in December. So for this year's budget, it'll be half the cost, but from next year onwards, of course, it'll be the full years. So there's a number of positions in there. So things like a youth officer is a position we need, or rather an events officer. We need a development officer. There's a procurement officer in there. So we'll provide all the business cases to council for approval. And that report is expected to come to council along with the budget on the 12th of April. And then depending council decision, we'll then flow the numbers through to the budget or not. Yes, Jane?
Thank you for that. So does that mean all the positions that are currently vacant and being recruited will be put on hold?
No. So the current approved positions, if they're vacant now, and most of them are in the process of being recruited, they'll be recruited. So we're actually talking about 4.6 adding new staff into the organisation, new positions into the organisation, over and above what I currently have now.
So all our horticultural staff will be recruited as part of the program?
Yes, that's the intention, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. My goal, honestly, at any point in time, is if I can achieve 100% recruitment, that's the ideal, because it takes pressure off the rest of the staff. Yeah.
Where does how does you talked about the $1.2 million of temporary and casual staff. We run to a cap of FTEs. How do those two fit in? It sort of seems a bit farcical almost that we tie into, is 164.82 the cap? What's the cap? What cap do we run to? 164.82, do we?
That is the cap.
Not even a round number. So...
Someone comes in and morning tea.
Yeah, that's right. Send them home Thursday afternoon. Yeah, so how does that work? I guess I was a bit taken aback by, I mean, I'm sure you've got casual staff and temporary staff. Interesting that they're so much cheaper. Perhaps we should be pushing the other way, getting more temporary staff, Chris. But how does that work? It seems a bit nonsensical slightly that we have a FTE cap, but then quite a serious budget for temporary staff that obviously top that in a number of ways.
Yep. So I guess you're right, Grant. There's the FTE budget, or the employee cost budget, but also the temporary cost budget. And normally the way we handle it is we review every position at its own merit. We work out, do we need a casual staff here? For example, some of the depot team, they might need a casual staff and not someone on the books for the entire year. It could be, something that's seasonal. And then we review every position and then work out whether it's temporary or whether it's permanent, someone that we need for the full time. If we can justify that we can effectively utilize that resource for the entire year, then we put them on the books. If we feel that it'll be better off getting someone casual, for example, Regal Theatre, someone at the front door, or someone, at the candy bar, that's right, thank you. Then we say, that's a casual staff. So we do actually review all the positions and go through it and work out which one's temporary, which one's permanent. But you're right in that it's all staff costs. So we were talking about, in terms of reporting and the reports that come monthly to council, perhaps we include something around temporary costs as well, or temporary staff, just to have that completeness, I suppose. But out of these 4.6 FTEs, one FTE will have some offsetting costs with the temporary labor, but the other two are not currently employed at all through the temporary costs bucket. So there'll be brand new positions that come to council for approval. But you're right, it's part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah, I guess the word equivalent, I suppose, picked up every month.
All right.
Calculation, if you were
Yeah.
4 hours at Canberra.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I'm sure more can be done in that space.
A lot of this this casual staff are skills-based staff. I mean, candy bar is not exactly skills-based, but the pool attendants, for example, are. They have to have certain life-saving requirements, they have to have flexible hours, and they aren't needed when the pool closes on the 30th of April. So, you know, those are costs that we have to do that are seasonal. The Regal, you've got casuals that work there. There are some times when it's much busier than others. Like when they put the live shows on, they have to have a lot more staff to run the bars. But normal, like yesterday, I went to the movies there, and they had one staff on, and he was overwhelmed because there were so many people came, and the poor guy could hardly cope with it all. But that's the unexpectedness, and that's what casuals are all about, you know. So you can never predict, even no matter how much you calculate, you can't predict your exact costs in relation to those kind of casual hours. And I haven't even thought about casuals in the library.
It's great. I sort of feel the FTE cap is a bit of an odd thing anyway, because since I've been here, I think, you know, we've never gone over the cap, but we don't tend to go under the cap either. So it almost sort of locks it in. So I'm not sure whether it's, I can see why it's good in concept, but I'm not sure that's a different thing, I understand. But given you're now wanting to make it higher, it's probably a good time to look at that area.
Yeah. In terms of the council having a level of control on the full-time employees of the organisation, it's a pretty good control, because, you know, for me, that's a hard and fast cap.
But these are not just full-times, I think, these are part-times and then.
Sorry, if they're permanent, if they are permanent and part-time, so that if there's a level of permanency, you're in that number. So it certainly achieves the goal in that it ensures a level of discipline around the number of permanent staff. But there are times when we utilise casual staff to meet an organisation demand. But the question is that presenting to the general public a true staff complement? So I'll have a look at it.
Thank you. Also in that, because there's a whole lot of IR issues associated with casuals now changing. I mean, there's claims going before courts for casuals to be actually recognised and to have sick leave and all those sort of benefits. I don't know what time frame that's likely to.
The advice that just come out, so I'm not sure about it.
So that won't affect this.
No, this won't affect our budgets. And in fact, the sick leave component, we know may have an impact on us. We're required to have sick leave, but it may not also, because if that person isn't at work, we would have brought another person in. So potentially the cost to us is the same. It's just that the individual is going to receive a sick leave payment. Our team are constantly reviewing the IR position. And obviously, some time ago, you'll note there was a thing where, you know, if casual staff worked a regular set of hours, after a certain period of time, you were required to put them on as permanent part-time staff. So we already regard to that and manage that situation. No, that most recent one, it's still it's so flush. Keep watching the brief on that. But it will not impact our budget.
Can I have a question? Thank you. Yeah, I'm new to the chamber, unlike Councillor Pickett and Councillor Davey and Cornish and Anne. But when I, over the years, seeing, you know, this head count, 160 something or other, 161, whatever, over the years, oh yeah, right. So, but now we've got this new strategic plan and, you know, the new look, you know, with you. And I sort of think, comes to my mind, oh, you know, does our old structure and everything and number of FTEs, and it just aligns with what Councillor Pickett said, fit with our new direction and everything, and whether it's an opportunity now to just have a look at all of this and say, can we promote from within? Can we have those full-time employees increased? I mean, at the moment, it's like over 15%. We've got 15% of, out of the 17 million, we've got 3 million of consultants and contractors and so forth. If you equate that to FTEs, that's like over 15%. So just sort of wondering, yeah, that a nice refresh of numbers. I don't.
It's a situation that I constantly review.
Yes, yes.
Having got for our structure, I do my best efforts to make sure we don't have a top-heavy structure. So you find that most of that 164
Yeah.
are actually engaged in direct service provision. So I'm quite comfortable that, given with our new strategic plan,
Mm-hmm.
that number's quite reasonable and sound.
Mm-hmm.
The thing we have to have regard for, though, is that we have effectively kept the cap on it for 5 odd years, and we do know I am stretching a lot of my staff to the point now, because there's always a point in time where the staff deliberately, I can get a bit of stretch out of them, and then you cross that hurdle of needing a second staff member.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find here in our service provision is we're hitting that point. And my feeling, and I think it's from the chamber, is that in the city of Burnside we pride ourselves on our level of service. That's a good thing, I think.
Yes, Peter.
Could I just ask, when the report comes or maybe an info document, perhaps we can get full-time, part-time casuals, headcount and FTE equivalent? But obviously that's what we should employ. But that sort of just gives us maybe a bit of a basis of the size and scope.
Sorry, it's lost. So obviously the easy bit is, that makes sense, is that the headcount of permanent staff, FTEs,
Could we get it broken down with full-time staff, part-time staff and casuals? Headcount and equivalent FTE that we sort of utilise. I don't know about the headcount is and where, yeah.
oh yeah, no issue with that.
You know,
Could
I'm sure
you-
there's some way of calculating.
Could you
know,
just actually
average.
include total number of casual hours?
To Castle Piggott, the trainer.
I don't think.
It could be the number of hours that we engage them in a month or something like that. It might be the way that you calculate it, or in a week. But
You could show hours per month over the year, so you see the seasonal. I don't think we need to show part-time though. I just have an issue with separating out part-time as opposed to full-time, because that's what an FTE count is meant to show.
True.
That spread, and I just think shouldn't be singling out people who are working part-time just because there's.
At a high level, though, you can show it. So we could say we've got, because you can choose to report it's either 164 FTEs or
A head count, yes, correct. Yeah, you could show a head
I
count.
think at that high level,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be necessarily discriminating.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm happy to report about the high level of that.
That'd be good.
I'm not trying to make
No,
it
I
sound
just think
bad.
it would be.
It's a good thing.
Yeah,
Part-time.
It is a good thing.
flexible working place.
It is a good thing.
Yeah.
No, no, it's one of our strengths.
Yeah.
Working, you know, we work with a lot of our staff who would prefer flexible.
Job.
Thank you, everyone. Great questions. So cost of council business, and I must say we are still working on this. Like I mentioned before, we're still looking through the costs, the savings, and where we're getting cost pressures. So this is currently where we stand. So the local government price index was 3.5 in December. We've taken off some costs that we already accounted for in the previous year, so it's already in our cost of business, so that's 1%. But then we've added back some of the key costs that we are going to experience this year. So the biggest one for us this year is the election cost. So EXA have notified us that there will be a 25 to 30% increase in costs. I'm not sure why, but
State government fee.
so there's a 30% increase, so we've got to wear that one. Postal, yeah, potentially some part of it would be postal. There are other ancillary expenses as well with the voters' roll, etc. So that's going up in cost as well. The maintenance of the Brownhill-Keswick Creek GPTs. There's just one error there. Shouldn't say Glenside. That's for Kensington Gardens, so or the entire network of GPTs. So the net cost is 60 gross pollutant trap. Sorry. So that's 69,000 net. So we are getting reimbursed from Brownhill-Keswick Creek to a degree, but not for the entire lot.
The big nets attached to big sewer.
Well put.
The big nets you put in the stormwater drains, and then they fill up with crap, and then you pull them out and take them to the tip.
So when you dump your fridge in the canal.
So what, I mean, could we improve our street sweeping to stop it getting to that stage? I mean, would that help?
Put on your microphone, because I can't hear you.
Sorry, Councillor Davey just asked if we improved our street sweeping, could we reduce the amount of trash that goes into the gross pollutant traps? I've got to say, the kind of litter that gets into the gross pollutant traps isn't the debris that's captured by our street sweepers. It's bottles, cans, all sorts of ridiculous things that you actually don't generally see on our roads. It's interesting. It's what gets in there after heavy rains that comes from all sorts of different areas. Yeah.
Karishma, are we adding fuel costs as a potential cost pressure? Because that could significantly, impact the budget.
Our current budget for fuel is not significant. It's 190. So we will face some cost pressures there, but we are expecting costs to come through from East-West. So that is included in that 3.5% at the top. So I've included that. So these costs that we've listed out are those costs which weren't there in the previous year. The new costs that have come in for next year, either increase services or increase in service levels. So yes, fuel cost is covered. Thanks, Sarah.
But those 3.5, that's from December, so it will have increased again from December?
Oh, it's expected to increase again, yes.
So we shouldn't be conservative in our estimate of what that
You're
LGPI
right.
potentially will be.
That is correct. And when we come to adopt the final budget in June, we will update that for the March CPI and LGPI, and we'll again add the cost of business because we'll have a better idea closer to June as well. It will, I'm guessing it will. Definitely, there's a premium on everything at the moment. Yes, Anne?
Have there been any increases in illegal dumping of rubbish? Is that an increased cost for us? Is that increasing or is it remaining stable, or you're aware of that at all?
Not that
I was alerted today. I parked in that little dead-end street at the back of the park, and there somebody put a great big long vacuum cleaner right next to the rubbish.
All right.
Like the green bin, you know.
Not that we've been made aware
we have that up at
of.
Mount Osmond and you have that at Skye, so, and I just wondered if that is an additional, something that's appearing to be an additional cost as people get lazier and lazier and dump stuff on the side of the roads.
Not any more than normal.
Okay,
Yep, so we've just,
that's fine.
yeah. Any other questions? So the cost pressures listed there, the third one down is the EHA increase in cost of 45,000. So as I mentioned last workshop, the Norwood Morialta School has moved and a number of the high school students have moved, which means they're now in the Burnside zone for immunization. So we have to pay additional charges. So that's,
Doesn't matter, they've always paid for.
So that's based on the location of the school as opposed to the location of the resident
yes, correct.
For the school immunisation
station program. Yeah, wow.
Year 8 and 9, mainly.
That is correct.
Don't worry, the Campbelltown will get some back when they rebuild the Morialta school after the kids have moved from.
private school children for free as well?
Yeah, we go to your school.
Yeah, private schools get the same.
Yeah.
All year 9.
Federal government
Right.
subsidise it, but it's not fully subsidised.
The fourth one down is COVID. So we're still suffering from COVID-related cost pressures, really around user charges, capacity management. So that's around Regal Theatre, swimming pool, they're down on revenue. So all up, it's 190 still for next year. And that's on top of what we're facing currently. Yes, Grant?
Are you expecting that to be 200 grand worse next
Than
year
this
than it is
year.
this year?
That's correct, yes.
Why?
So the swimming pool is still significantly down. The swimming, I think people just are not comfortable coming back. So I'm expecting, well,
But that would have
hopefully,
been the case all of this year too, wouldn't it?
sorry, what's that?
That would have been the case all this year as well, wouldn't it?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Grant, sorry. Is that,
Oh, it's
sorry?
just, I mean, yeah, look, you're answering my question, so I should let you. You think it'll be $200,000 worse next year,
Than it
which
is this
hopefully
year.
will be, you know, on the path out compared to what it is this year when we are, you know, we were in the middle of lockdowns and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, that's what all our reviews are telling us.
I hope it's not true of the rest
I
of the
hope
world.
it's not true. I have to agree with you. We did talk about that, but in particular, like, are we expecting it to be worse than what it is now? Because we do expect it to start recovering. But the swimming school in particular has seen a significant drop and it continues to in the swim school. Some,
And school visits. I've only seen one school in the last fortnight actually attending swimming lessons. This week's carnival week, so they've got
Yeah.
record carnivals this week that they didn't have last year at all, so that's actually bringing up the revenue. And they have actually, as of last weekend, there is an increase in the lane usage, so there's more people can use lanes now, so there's a slight increase in potential. But that doesn't mean to say people will come. Like with carnivals, you gain in one way and you lose in the other. Your regular swimmers who are there all day long, they can't swim, but all the kids are there. So it's actually a real, you know, hit and miss situation. But
We're saying it's going to be worse next year.
well, I can't see it any worse. I personally can't see it's worse.
One thing that is adding to our costs for next year, the COVID downturn this year has actually resulted in a shortfall or shortage of our lifeguards.
Yes.
So those lifeguards are in high demand and they're being snapped up by other councils. So we know that we're going to have to invest in training, a whole new induction of lifeguards next year and hopefully retain those. So that is a cost pressure over and above what we would have expected this year.
Right now, that's been a lot of new staff this year that have had to be trained.
I might just make a comment, Karishma. I understand exactly what you're saying, Councillor Bigot. I just, because obviously there's two components to my mind. One's the Regal, one's the pool. So to say it's going to be worse than it is today, have we factored in the changes that the government's talking about? And are we assuming, we're assuming that the people, even with the changes, are still hesitant? Is that what we're saying?
in all fairness, I should split that, to be honest, into two components. So one is the COVID-related impact of user charges because of COVID not coming back.
Yep.
But the other is also, it's been the second coldest summer, and that's also led to a downward trend in user charges. Now, I haven't split those two out. It's a bit
Okay.
hard to determine. Well, hopefully, yes. So I guess the numbers, the reduction in the numbers, it's a bit hard to tell whether it's COVID or whether it's the weather. But it's been clubbed in currently as it is there. But it is those two factors included. So 130 for swimming, 50 for Regal. And then there's other things that are impacted as well. So candy bar sales and also swimming pool merchandise. So that's also slightly impacted. Thanks, Paul. That's also slightly impacted when there aren't the numbers there.
Thank you, Karishma. A question from Councillor Hensky and then...
Thank you. Just, okay, so the Regal Cinema, amazing asset. It looks stunning every time I drive past that thing with that beautiful blue colour and pink and everything. I think, wow, that's fantastic, that building. Anyway, can we leverage more out of that asset? I tell you what, I mean, I hope we haven't got any contracts in place which mean that, you know, it's a sort of, what do you call it, peppercorn rent situation? Because couldn't we do some business development on that, for that asset and have that in our plan to draw in, do a partnership with the Festival Theatre? I mean, I'm sure we're doing lots of things at the moment, I know, but can we extract more cash from these people?
So rest assured, the team, particularly Farley's team, are constantly evaluating how we can drive visitation. Obviously, Barry's team are doing the Regal Theatre redevelopment master planning process. So that will be where we start to really look at optimising the site. So, but it's a two-stage process. I think this coming year we really need to look at how we can just optimise what we've got in terms of the structure. And Farley and I have had detailed conversations about initiatives that we can look at. And then longer term, the master plan will kick in and then we'll really look at how we can maximise utilisation of the asset. So the work is occurring on that space.
Can I ask when the master plan is coming to us? Do we know?
The lack of a green room is an obstacle to people wanting to use the theatre. However, the rented caravan is working, and we've got an increase in the number of big shows coming up over the next few months that are already being targeted and advertised online and on the Regal's website and at the Regal Theatre. So those are becoming, I mean, the last show that was the beginning of the weekend, the Fringe, they had sold out shows, four shows in one weekend. I mean, they're doing with 300 plus seats sold. So, you know, if we can do those kinds of things more regularly, and people are coming from all over Adelaide to those particular shows because of the people who are presenting.
Yep.
So I was actually discussing this very subject this afternoon. We're just compiling all of the industry related feedback that we've got through the process. We're expecting to present the first draft of the master plan to council in early April. We'll then obviously go to consultation before we endorse the final plan later this financial year. But I've asked Aaron to start prepare some information for elected members that we can circulate to get your feedback at this stage prior to us presenting to council. And just to expand on what Chris said there as well, you'll see that cinemas, especially single-screen cinemas in the current day, are struggling. So we need to make it a multi-purpose, flexible, usable facility. And to attract more of those type of events, we need better green room, stage space, everything that comes with it. That's what the master plan will be focusing on.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a question, and I know that this is the third time that we've done this, so I probably should have asked the question 3 years ago. When you're talking the additional cost pressures here, though, are you talking relative to the previous year's budget? So we've had a reduction in Q1 and Q2 already for the Regal and the swimming centre, so that's not necessarily 190,000 less to where we are now. It's relative to last year's budget, where we perhaps over budgeted. Does that make sense?
No, this one's relative to the Q1 budget review.
Okay.
So some of the user charges would have gone through.
Would have already gone through. So we're
That's
saying
right.
we've
190 on top of that.
on top of
So
that.
that's what Grant was pointing out, that, you know, we are going down further even though the economy is recovering. So it just seems like it's contradicting a little bit.
I just think given it's 0.5 in 4.1, I think it's probably worth just having
Certainly.
Because we're only
Certainly.
just, yeah. There's been restrictions on the pool this year for basically the entire financial year.
That's correct.
Whereas we won't necessarily have those restrictions in place next year. But I agree, like I've been at the pool weekly for kids swimming lessons this term and there's crickets chirping. It's really, really quiet. Yeah.
Yeah.
My point.
No, we'll split that out as well, just so it's more, it's clearer what those costs relate to.
Given that we know elections happen every 4 years, shouldn't we be accruing for the cost over 4 years rather than having to have every 4 years pick our rates up by 0.7%?
That's an excellent suggestion. I have tried that. I've tried amortizing it over 4 years because. Yeah.
$10 with your vote, make the election free.
No, that is a really good point. I have tried arguing with the auditors that we do get elected members for 4 years. So really the matching principle should apply, where you're getting 4 year worth of service, but you're expensing it in the first year. No go. No. I'll try again.
But you could still raise the revenue, couldn't you?
You could still raise the revenue, but
You could put it in
a general provision.
Put it in your piggy bank and then pull it out.
No, but it's a great suggestion. Oh, yes, that's right. I'll speed along. The only thing I did want to point out is the Era Water security charge is not included at the moment because there's no decision made on that. So it's just pending, but just flagged in there.
Could I just clarify, just on that, could you, because this will come up, we haven't done a debate yet, but the security charge effectively moves operational deficit effectively to us from Era Water. So my understanding on overall, including subsidiaries, the impact wouldn't be the full 122, it would only be 30 or something like that. Is that fair to say?
A portion, as far as I understand, that's how it'll work because their surplus will go up, so we'll get a higher
'Cause
share.
If we don't
gain.
pay it, we'll share 90 grand of the bigger loss they'll have.
Yeah,
And if we
Correct.
do pay it, it'll cost us 122.
Yeah.
So the net impact right at the bottom is only sort of, well, I'm not sure only, but is
yeah.
30,000, not 120, yeah.
Have you planned for them to keep making losses, or have we planned based on their previous business plans?
So that would be okay if council decides to increase their debt cap. Otherwise, that enterprise by itself is insolvent.
Look, that's a different issue. I guess all I was getting at was that, I mean, it's not I don't think right at the bottom with subsidiaries, all I was trying to clarify, the impact's not 0.3 compared to where we would have been. It's
Not
0.1.
at the bottom. That's
or
correct,
Something
yeah.
like that, that's
Yep.
all.
That's correct.
Which I think will be quite key when it's debated, yeah.
So what's yet to be finalized? I'm just going to breeze through the slides. So essentially a number of decisions that, now these are all, most of them are included in the budget bids, but the reason they're listed separately is because council is yet to make a decision particularly on these. We are going to come back to council with a report. So some of these are just listed in there with the amounts allocated next to it. The rate capping that's listed right at the top doesn't have an impact on expense or revenue. It's just a council decision that needs to be made on whether council does an automatic rate capping above the 12.5% increase or whether it's capping on application. So we just need to make that call once we decide on the budget. Again, sorry.
Krishma, do we know how many houses or how many properties that would impact? Because obviously we know from last year.
No, that would depend on the percentage of rates. So depending on whether we go 1, 2, 3, 4%, I can then work out how much. But we'll have some indicative numbers for the council report.
But there would have been some as well last year that because of the change in the valuation, they might have been capped.
Or how many we
Do you know what
capped
I mean?
last year? I
Yeah.
don't know at the top of my mind. I'll take that on notice.
800 or so, wasn't it?
It was quite a few.
7 to 900, somewhere in there. Properties that we put the cap on.
So So they will have seen that last year, but now they might get to their full value.
That's correct. So that It won't be a year-on-year cap,
Yeah.
so they would have got their cap last year. So they shouldn't have,
But we
Yes.
shouldn't have as many hitting that cap because of the difference in valuation?
we've had quite a big spike in valuation this year, so we've had about 30% increase in valuation.
Oh, wow.
But as long as the average
That's an average.
is
Yeah.
30%, I do. I don't know if I want to quote the number because I'll tell you, it's 13,915. But I'm not, that are above the average. But I do need to do some analysis on those numbers. We have questioned it. We have questioned the value generals. There might be, what my initial gut feel is the growth properties are in there, which are the big spikes, the 100% increases, which if I take out, it definitely won't be that high a number.
They're lining themselves up for a lot of business. The property owners going to say, I want you to revalue my property, thank you very much.
It's not just this council either. Talking to other mayors, it's in a large number of metropolitan councils, same problem.
That's correct. I think the confusion also is that the revaluation initiative happened last year, but the spikes are also happening this year more than what was last year. But the reason is this year it's matching the market.
So, I suppose for me, my big concern is the properties that got a 30% rise last year and they're getting a 30% rise again this year. It's a 60% rise in 2 years of their property valuation, which is obviously going to have a huge hit when it comes to all of their bills. Sorry, Mike, can you hear me? I'm usually pretty loud though. I am really concerned about
Yeah.
those that are getting a 60% whammy over 2 years.
Why don't you leave that with
property
me?
value increase.
Let me slice and dice the data a little bit more. Like I said, I'm not confident with the 13,000 number. It just seems ridiculously high. And I'm thinking the reports probably include the growth properties, which is why it's skewed. Leave it with me. Let me get back to you on that. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what the increases in valuation are for this year. And I'll add in last year as well. And I can provide you that data.
Can I also ask how hard is it to go down this whole rate capping exercise to work out how much it will cost us, et cetera, by bringing it in like a mandatory, like we're actually going to do it on your behalf, whereas previously we've always had the cap in there of the 12.5, but previously it's been the resident has had to raise it with us and then we'd cap it,
Yep.
versus us a mandatory, like we're doing it before it goes out.
I'll include that in the report. I'll
Okay.
provide scenarios for
Thanks.
if you do it automatic versus manual. This year, this current year, yes.
We did the mandatory, yes, in 21-22.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
was,
you know, in terms of doing the figures with over 50% of the properties versus last time it was nowhere near 50% of the properties of this city, which is just a scary, scary number.
I'll certainly have a look into that.
Can I have I just want to understand, I asked this question last year, the 12.5% capping is when there's been a valuation increase over and above the average. What happens if you add a second story to your home, all that, that's not included in the 12.5%?
That's correct, that's not included.
Oh, I got that right?
Yep,
Or
that's
you
correct.
subdivide the property and all that, okay.
Correct.
Right, thank you.
Correct. Okay, keep going. Rate scenarios. So these are a few rate scenarios you put forward in front of you. So the first one is the 0%, which is based on current year. Got the adopted long-term plan of 1.9. We've got a break-even position of 2.7. We've got LGPI 3.5. Got 3.9 is our starting proposed position. And we've got a 4.1 cost of business. Now, the reason we've gone for 3.9 as a proposed starting position is because of that $500,000 surplus that we like to have just as a buffer in case we get hit by, you know, another storm or COVID or anything else that's not currently accounted for. Having said that, that is correct, in line with audit committee as well, whose advice has been to keep between the $500 and $1 million in surplus, just to have that buffer as well. The option council, of course, has is to strip out all the projects, which currently is assumed at 400,000. If we do that, if we don't do any operating projects this year, we can afford the 2.7 rates rise and have a surplus. Or the other option is to consciously choose not to have that buffer and opt for a break-even position. But that means if we have any unexpected hits, we go into a deficit. So these are some of the options in front of you. Of course, the debt would change depending on the rates increases. So the higher the rates, the lesser the debt in year 10, all things being equal. And the operating surplus just shows that the first two options will give us deficits in 1 or more years, and the last 4 options provide us surplus in all the years, but of course to differing amounts. Any questions on that slide? Yes, Jane? I will go through that, hopefully, quickly. Yes, Anne?
Just quick, do we know at this point in time what other councils
Yes, we do.
are looking at? Because I can't see it in here.
It's not in the pack.
But I've been talking about there's like starting at 3% and up.
Yes. It's not in the pack for a reason. These numbers are not public.
Because they're not finished yet.
They're not. They're just starting to talk about it, but I do have it right here in the next slide. So just wanted to show you where other councils are pitching their rates, the orange bars for next year, and we've also compared it to where their rates were for last year. So as Martin mentioned earlier in today's workshop, we went with 0%, the other councils didn't. And the other councils are now going for what's less than our 3.9. Again, it's a council decision at the end of the day, but just for comparatives, we've provided that for your information. So Campbelltown, Mitcham, Prospect are all 3.5 currently. All of these numbers exclude growth, so the total figure would be higher than this, but this is just comparing apples for apples. That's the LGPI 3.5.
None of these have gone to the councils yet. These are just
That's correct, yes. This is just the starting position. Yeah. Yeah.
This is what we would have expected last year, because the 0 rate rise in a couple of years, we knew this was going to happen.
Can't we do what the City of Adelaide does? and just look at our rate in the dollar, because if the
Oh, we have to.
30%, our rate in the dollar is going to drop by, what, 26%, 27%. And then we can just tell everyone we're dropping our rates.
It's
by
negative.
7%, which is what they do in the city.
It's a negative rates increase. So this slide's just, I'm just going to run through this. It's just a comparison of our adopted long-term plan and where the draft position lands us if we were to go with 3.9%. So it's just a basis to compare. Savings, budgeted reductions, that this excludes the lost income. So this is just based on our savings to date. So we're currently on track for the current year, stretch target and the 750. For next year's budget, we only have 430, which was the employee costs that we saved. We have identified some savings in materials, but it doesn't have a stretch target on the materials budget for next year. Debt levels, lots of information in there. Again, I'm just going to rush through this one. Essentially, our current total is 13.5 million, expected to be 23 million. Based on 3.9% rates increase, it'll stay pretty consistent, and our target is 50% debt to income ratio, and we are within that target. Again, that's a self-imposed target. We haven't, council hasn't set a target as such, but it's just a self-imposed one by administration. These are just some indices for the 10 years. So just showing us, we've just kept rates at 2.5% for the next 4 years, and then 2.8 moving forward. But as and when we get the new CPI for March, we'll have to update that. I'm expecting the CPI and LGPI to be a lot higher after the Ukraine issue as well, the event. So it will definitely go up. Yes, Sarah?
Krishma, the year two, like the growth of 1%, is that Glenside or Burnside Village or both?
It's Burnside Village, but also Glenside, so we're expecting both of those to come through. But there might be spillover into year two, 23-24, and 24-25. So those 2 years, there might be a bit more in year three as well. Again, lots of numbers on that page, but the key number to note is 142 million, which is what we will be spending on assets over the next 10 years. So we do have allocations in there, which are general allocations. So we've got 23 million across the 10 years for new projects, and we've got 10 million for renewal projects. So there is some room for council-approved projects within the long-term plan. This is the one, operating projects. Now, we've only picked operating projects to focus on and not the capital projects, just conscious there wasn't enough time. So the funding currently included in the long-term plan is 400,000. The projects currently proposed for inclusion, which is in the next slide I'll go through, is 346. So we've still got 53,000 remaining. That slide there has the elected member budget bids. And if we were to propose the two that administration's proposing to fund, then we're essentially using all of that 400,000 allocation that's within our long-term plan. On the flip side, if elected members choose not to fund any of the operating projects, then we save about a percentage in rates, which is an option. So I'll go to the next slide, which is what we are proposing. So this is what you would have seen in the last workshop and your budget papers. We've had another look, and we've decided to defer Chambers Gully by another year, only because it had $65,000 for year one, but there was also quite a big impact on the bottom line because of the loss on disposal, because we were going to dispose of the building before the time within the asset management system, which was 123,000. So that particular project in itself would have had a 200K hit on our bottom line, so we've pushed it out. Sorry, yes, of course. That's the proposal. Yep.
It's non-cash, who cares?
That's one way to do it, but oh, the physical cost, yes, 65. You don't, we'll just go into a deficit, that's all. Thank you. So those are the projects that are coming to council for funding or for inclusion in the budget. And as I mentioned, 22nd of March, that's when council will see the report. End of the day, it's a council decision. So the decision will be between operating and capital and elected member bids. Yes, Chris? Yes, the other one that we did look at was the city master plan, so 70,000. So we did talk about moving that into 2 years, so doing like a phase 1 and phase 2, and splitting the cost over 2 years just to ease off that cost pressure a bit. So the report that you'll see on the 22nd of March will have that in 2 years. Yes, Jane?
Is it possible when we're
I'll explain that. It's just semantics. The number, sorry. Grant, are you talking about number 14 having 0? The reason is because that budget bid itself has 0, but the council resolution has 7,000. So it's just semantics with, and then in the next page, we can see that budget bid 117 was initially allocated 20,000, and we are recommending 13 because we've taken 7,000 out. All right, on to the last couple of slides. So just engagement, community engagement. So the public meeting is tentatively booked in for Thursday, 19th of May, but we do have to keep our eye on the COVID emergency directions. Currently, it's up until the end of March, so we'll let council members know once we know more about whether we can host the public meeting or not. We'll do the usual publications via social media and the Adelaide East Herald. And the next steps for the budget process, 22nd of March, council will receive the report on the projects. 30th of March, the draft budget and long-term plan will go to the audit committee. It'll come to council on the 12th of April. Consultation will be from 26th of April to 20th of May. The public meeting, as I mentioned, to be confirmed. There'll be another workshop where we consider the responses and final tweaks to the budget, and then we'll present it to audit committee on 20th of June and then to council on 28th of June. And then we'll be done for another year. And then it'll be back before you know it.
Regarding the citywide letter drop, can we please not put that in a plastic sleeve? I've had this discussion with the CEO. I'm really embarrassed. We sent out our last.
You do acknowledge that it was council resolution to do that, right?
I think.
I didn't make the decision.
No, but it is winter.
Yeah, that's why we had it was a resolution, I think.
I'm happy to do it, but just be aware.
I do not want us to see us. It's winter.
Sorry, councillors. Sorry, Councillor Davey. I just need to give you an update. Bernie has managed to track down a company that it's a compostable plastic. So I haven't had a final update, but that was early last week. So I was actually pleased Bernie pursued that. So it might be that we can still wrap it, but it will be with a compostable product. Okay? Yeah.
My Dickers one in cornstarch packaging, they've got it now. And
Yeah, so,
it feels like that.
yeah. No, so my commitment was to try and honour the council resolution, and once I can source that, we'll be fine.
And I'm happy to move it,
Yeah.
resolution if
Yeah.
necessary.
The nuance with it is we use a lot of inserts in the focus. If we don't wrap them, they come out. So it's just about finding the way to achieve both goals, because otherwise we incur a lot more expense doing the separate mail-outs. I think the best bet is if I can get a compostable plastic, then we solve everything. So leave that with me.
Actually, will we be reviewing the whole Focus magazine, number of pages and all of that? Is it possible to review that? Because we made decisions about it a while ago, I think, in our first year? Not our second year? It's just that I've just noticed other councils have less pages and different printing and different paper, and I just was curious about it.
I'm certainly not intending to bring it back to council this stage. I think we're a fair way down the track. We've got an election coming in November. I think our focus needs to be on other areas.
I think because the messenger,
Even in plastic. Yeah, people read that. Oh, I know that Focus is fabulous, I'm not denying that. I wasn't referring to plastic.
All right.
you should have an
Right.
opt-out.
Thank you. I know we covered a lot of information this evening. Madam Mayor and council members. So please avail yourselves of Commissioner Martin should you have any follow-up queries and questions. We'll go away and do a little more homework on those couple of items that we spoke about and pull this thing together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for all your work.
Thanks, Tony.
If anyone has any feedback on rates, can you please send us an email or any questions? Thank you.